So the 2015 NBA draft is officially in the books, and I'm here to give you my recap of said 2015 NBA draft. For those of you that are looking for me to talk about the biggest winners and losers in this year's draft, don't worry, that video is coming up soon. But what I wanted to talk about in this video more are about some of the biggest stories from draft night, some of the biggest surprises, at least to me, and then give my overall thoughts on how the draft ended up breaking down and just the draft in general. Now, in terms of the biggest stories for the 2015 NBA draft, I think the big story that kicked us off really was the Los Angeles Lakers taking D'Angelo Russell #2 overall. Most people assumed, rightfully so, that Karl Anthony Towns had to be the guy and was going to be the guy for the Timberwolves at #1. Now you have the Lakers, who for a long time have been penciled in to take a Jahlil Okafor #2, and most people had assumed until very, very late in the process that they would take a Jahlil Okafor #2. The Lakers shocked many by taking a D'Angelo Russell, the point guard from Ohio State, #2 overall. And once that happened, it kind of threw some things, out of whack in terms of the draft, at least a little bit. I don't think it was that stunning, though. I mean, this is a guard and perimeter-driven league, and as much as having a skilled low-post big man like an Okafor is nice on the offensive end, when you look at the type of skill set that a D'Angelo Russell brings to the table, it's not hard to see why the Lakers went with D'Angelo Russell over Jahlil Okafor, especially when you consider that you have big men hitting the free agent market like LaMarcus Aldridge and Kevin Love and DeAndre Jordan, and there's a very good chance that the Los Angeles Lakers could end up with at least one of them. And when you already have Julius Randle in the mix, mind you, did you really want to sit there and spend the #2 overall pick on a guy like Okafor, knowing you could potentially bring in a big man? In this case, now you've got a guy in Russell where if you bring in one of those big men, it's going to be a much easier fit for all pieces and parties involved. And it makes you a little more appealing to a big man to say, hey, you could play long term alongside guys like Jordan Clarkson and D'Angelo Russell and maybe Julius Randle as well. I think another big story had to be the New York Knicks rolling the dice and taking the 7-1 Latvian Kristaps Porzingis #4 overall. Oh, baby! Those Knicks fans were pissed. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the '99 NFL draft, where all the Eagles fans were in love with Ricky Williams and thought he had to be the godsend and the savior, and they wanted him so bad. And then when the Eagles took Donovan McNabb, they just booed the pick to all kingdom fucking come because apparently they never bothered watching Syracuse and seeing how good of a prospect Donovan McNabb was. That's kind of how I feel with Porzingis. It's like if the Knicks would have taken an American player, then the pick would have been cheered. But since it was the foreign guy and there's that fear of the foreign player among a lot of NBA fan bases, and somewhat understandably so, this pick was going to get pooned and booed out of the fucking building. Only time will tell if the Knicks made the right decision or not. But it was definitely a big story. It had people buzzing. And every draft needs that. It needs those buzzworthy moments. And Porzingis going #4 to the Knicks was a seminal moment in this draft. There's no question about it. It was a marquee moment. Another thing that was interesting to me in a guard and perimeter-driven league, especially at the point guard position, you had 6 point guards taken within the first 20 picks and 7 when you throw in Tyus Jones in the first 24. I'm not that surprised. You had some good point guard talent in this draft, especially point guards with size, maybe outside of Tyus Jones and Terry Rozier. Wasn't that surprising to me to see that many point guards go that early? You got to have one that can contribute in some way, shape, or form in today's NBA. You just have to have one. But also, you had 6 Kentucky players drafted, including 4 of them in the lottery. You talk about 6 Kentucky players, it tied the 2012 Kentucky team for the most players ever drafted out of one school in a single NBA draft. That's a hell of a thing for John Calipari to hang his hat on. He could sit there and say, we don't always win national championships, but if you come play for me, you will get drafted. I'll get you to the promised land. So that was another big deal as well. Now, in terms of big surprises to me, I was really surprised by the lack of first-round trades, just in terms of the sheer quantity. I expected more than we got. And I think in some cases, there should have been more than what we had. There was also that lack of a mega trade. And then that really surprised me too, because I was thinking that somewhere along the way, somebody was going to make a move from maybe somewhere between 16 to 20 or 21 up into the lottery, or somebody picking between maybe 9 to 14 will want to move up into the top 5. And we didn't get that. And that kind of stinks, because it's always more interesting when a draft has that type of mega trade. Again, it gives you a buzzworthy kind of seminal moment, that kind of thing that you look back on several years later, similar to the Knicks taking Porzingis at number 4. So I was surprised by that as well. I was really floored, though, with the fact that Justice Winslow dropped all the way to number 10 in this draft. This reminded me of way back in the day when Paul Pierce went number 10 overall. That's what it reminded me of. And every year it seems like this happens, where a player that should go much higher ends up dropping, because in some teams' cases it's a matter of situation and circumstance. In some teams' cases it's just sheer stupidity. They overthink things, or they just aren't thinking at all and don't know what the hell they're doing. Justice Winslow going number 10 to the Miami Heat was a coup for them, and a major surprise to me. I can't believe he fell that far. In terms of my overall thoughts on the 2015 NBA draft, as I had mentioned before the draft began, I thought this was a good draft and a deep draft with several big-time prospects, but a lot of guys that could really develop into quality future NBA players. Don't all have to be superstars or stars to be quality players. There were some teams that I thought did pretty well and really helped themselves out for now and in the future, and I'll talk about that again in my NBA draft winners and losers video. But there were other teams that didn't do so well, and in particular, there were other teams that showed why they are who they are and why they are consistently picking in the same damn spots each and every single year. They make a mistake, then they repeat the mistake. They pretend to learn from that mistake, all the while they repeat the same mistake again, expecting the result to be any different, so that when it turns out the exact same, they make the same mistake again, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And those are the teams that never get anywhere. Those are the teams that constantly spin their wheels. Those are the teams that consistently find themselves picking in the same place in the lottery. And you definitely had those teams here. A couple of viewership notes for me in terms of my viewership experience and enjoyment of the NBA draft. This was a 5+ hour process. And I realize it's only 2 rounds. It's only 1 day. Maybe it's because it started a little later, but it really felt like it was a haul to watch the 2015 NBA draft on ESPN. Now, maybe, and I wasn't watching anything on NBA TV, so I don't know how their coverage was. Maybe it was the fact that when you look at the guys that they had Jalen Rose, they had Jay Williams and Jay Billis. So, anytime there was a dookie on there, that Williams and Billis were going to pop huge Blue Devil boners. But, it was, it felt like a bit of a chore to watch. I'm sitting there as it gets to the second round. I'm like, oh, God, can we speed this along? It seemed like 5 hours of draft was a little bit too much and a little unnecessary. It really did. I mean, you're talking about 5 minutes in between each pick in the first round and 3 minutes in between picks in the second round. So when you add that up, you would say, with no other bullshit, that's 2.5 hours for round 1, an hour for round 2, throw in an hour to hour and a half of filler time. That still gets you around 3.5 to 4 hours. Why this thing was 5 hours is lost to me, and I hope they can figure out a way to smoothen this out and shorten it up. Or if anything else, find some different ways to mix it up in order to keep the draft fresh as we go along. Something the NFL does well when they bring in especially people on day number 2 of the draft, fan contest winners, former players, what have you. Bring in some of these people to announce these picks, especially in the second round. That would be something that I think would help the process. Another thing that I think would help is if they did allow trades during the actual draft. Because once you here's kind of how it works with the NBA draft. Once you get to, I think it's 2 p.m. Eastern on draft day, no team can trade any actual picks before or during the draft, and you have to wait until the players are actually selected. And then what usually happens is you have to wait until a player is selected, and then you find out that he may be on the move to this team or that. And I think it creates an awkward situation for all people involved. I wish there was a better way to work this out where you could actually allow these trades during the draft. Now, with that being said, that would probably mean these teams would need to have more time on the clock, which might lead to you having to perhaps have the draft over 2 nights, but maybe that's something the NBA could entertain at some point. Maybe. Just maybe. But I think that's something that could help the overall viewing experience. I do like the way Adam Silver conducted himself in this draft. I know a lot of people are probably like, get to the point, Junior, when he was talking about the Golden State Warriors and how they were built through the draft. But I understood what he was getting at, and he was driving home the point that the draft matters because it still can matter. And I think some of those players and prospects that might have been sitting there, like especially Jahlil Okafor, like, oh, come on, man, hurry up. No, you need to listen. Because it was a good message, too, when you talk about Draymond Green and where he was drafted and, the fact that Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson and Harrison Barnes, they weren't number 1 overall picks. The point is that you could be that type of guy. You could be those type of players, and that these players matter all throughout the draft. I thought it was a great message. I really like how he did the thing for the old NBA stats guy that had been with the Sixers organization for so many years. I thought that was really, really cool. I loved the little thing they did in between round 1 and 2 and for Rod Thorne. I thought that was a class move. For all the things I ended up not liking David Stern for towards the end of his reign as NBA commissioner, Adam Silver's done a really good job, and he gets the image part. He gets the goodwills and the hit you in the cockles of your hearts and the touchy feels part. And he does a good job on that. And creating these things that help the draft process, if you will, watching it as a fan. So overall, I did have fun, even though, like I said, I did feel like it was a bit of a chore. And there are some things, in my opinion, that the NBA could do to make the NBA draft more must-see television than it is. I'm not saying it's ever going to reach the level of the NFL draft. No way, Jose, is that ever going to happen for a myriad of reasons. But I think they could make the draft better. But I still had a lot of fun talking about it in the process leading up to it, and I had a lot of fun watching the draft on Thursday night. So stay tuned. There will be other draft-related videos. Next up will be my 2015 NBA draft, biggest winners and losers. So stay tuned.